Good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you might be in the world. I am here today with James Erwin and Auguste Meyrat. We are going to be debating fusionism. James Erwin is arguing that fusionism is still relevant today, and Auguste Meyrat is arguing it's less relevant. So let's start with you, James. We're ready for your opening statement.
All right. Well, thank you very much for having us. I think that it is self-evident that fusionism is relevant today by virtue of us even having this conversation. We have not gathered today to argue whether Georgism is relevant today, or even if the Canadian social credit movement. Movements and ideas that are irrelevant don't tend to be debated because it is known, it is accepted that they are irrelevant. So I think that it is self-evident that in getting critiqued, fusionism somewhat proves that it remains relevant today as a topic of conversation at the very least. But obviously, a far more potent and persuasive argument can be found in a principled or practical sense. So the principled argument for fusionism's relevance is that I think that it is at the center of the American project. It was not called that. I think that the term originates really with the writings of Frank Meyer in the mid-20th century. But the logic of fusionism can be detected in the Declaration of Independence that we just celebrated the 250th birthday of. And it is found in the principle that we live in a republic based upon natural rights or individual rights. The basic idea of fusionism is that it is a marriage of classical liberalism and cultural conservatism. But I think that classical liberalism requires what we would call Christian conservatism to some extent to even make any sense. The idea that we have transcendent rights that belong to a divinely ordained moral order that don't come from government, it presupposes that there is a God orchestrating nature in some way that has endowed us with certain inherent dignities by making us in his image. And so, therefore, the right to free speech, I would argue, it is not merely a utilitarian good because you can arrive at the best ideas by debating openly in the public square. I would argue it is an end in itself because God has ordained that we should have certain individual rights, right to life, liberty, and property. The right to life is not a talking point to resist abortion. It is a fundamental moral presupposition for any civilization to accept in order to be functional and to flourish. So I would argue that the language of liberalism, of classical liberalism, depends upon some degree of religiosity, and I think John Adams put it as succinctly as possible. I mean, we obviously have seen the counterexample in the continental enlightened liberalism of the French and the Germans making a mess of things, but in the British tradition, largely distilled by John Locke, I think recapitulating in a certain way, Protestantizing Catholic social teaching on natural rights, and sort of trying to come up with a new version of it relevant to the English. These two things are already necessarily married together. The right to property, which presupposes you can dispose of it in your own way, which assumes a free market, is an extension of Christian thinking. And as John Adams put it, our Constitution is for a moral and religious people. It is insufficient to the government of any other.
Thank you, James. Auguste, you're up.
So, when I told my politically engaged cousin that I was going to debate the merits and relevance of fusionism, he immediately asked me what this was. When I told him about the three legs of the fusionism school, as I understood it, as Wikipedia defines it, defense, free markets, and social conservatism, he still drew a blank. Keep in mind, this is a person who is not the usual ignorant normie. This is a guy who has helped with political campaigns, has read quite a few books on politics, and has written more than a few essays on political and cultural trends. Fusionism just never came up in this work that he does, and even when I tried explaining it, he mostly shrugged and moved on from the conversation. I feel like this illustrates my overall position, which is that fusionism today is no longer relevant in today's world. It made more sense in the Cold War days when these three issues largely determined a person's politics and often framed debates of that time. When half the world is some secular communist who poses a military threat, it made more sense for conservatives to adopt some form of fusionism. Without the foil of the Soviet Union, this makes less sense. This is why the right of today has become quite diffuse. Fused, right? So not only have the social conservatives, free marketers, and defense hawks gone their own way, but we now have populist conservatives, fiscal conservatives, elitist conservatives, pro-interventionists, isolationists, traditionalists, secularists, libertarians, anarcho-capitalists, monarchists, integralists, post-liberals, classic liberals, techno-futurists, and so on and so on and so on. Now, is fusionism completely obsolete? Not quite. Many people, usually on the older side, still define their politics along these three priorities. Excuse me. The Republican Party's platform is still fusionist. Most of them are Christian, anti-socialist, and pro-military. I assume their donors think along these lines too. So in this sense, the framework seems to work. But for anyone in the millennial, Gen Z, or now alpha generations, fusionism is hopelessly dated and out of touch with today's issues. When housing is unaffordable, jobs are shipped overseas, infrastructure is crumbling, quality of life is declining in major cities, DEI has destroyed meritocracy, wokeness is killing the culture, and the boomer horde the country's wealth. It seems besides the point to ask a person if they support our troops, believe in capitalism, and are part of a church. A new world requires a new hermeneutic framework. Fusionism is obviously convenient, but at this point, it's not going to get us too far with understanding the current situation. It is a three-sizes-fits-all that prevents us from better appreciating what matters to people.
All right. Let's have James start with the questioning or cross-examination. So James, you can ask questions, and Auguste will be on the hot seat to answer.
All right. Well, first, I think as Frank Meyer defined fusionism, who's sort of considered the father of it, yes, perhaps in public discourse, defense was added to this with the proximate threat of the Soviet Union. But I think Meyer and Buckley were always very clear that they were conceding a lot of their limited government preferences in order to combat the spread of communism, which was a threat to both the free market and to Christianity. My definition of fusionism was not so big on the strong defense, although I do believe that an engaged America around the world is a good thing and pushes the threats to our way of life further out. Would you agree that an alliance of people who believe in property rights, economic growth, as well as the nuclear family, public order, human flourishing, and public morality is still a natural alliance, or do you think there is a more convenient one available?
Yeah, I mean, I was able to see that when you made your opening. I was like, wait a minute, I thought fusionism meant the three things, and you're talking about liberty. So, I mean, I'm guessing that you're saying that fusionism, really, we're fusing two things right now. It's like, like natural freedoms or natural rights, and I guess kind of a Christian moral framework. Is that how we're kind of...
Yes, I have really a fusion of two rather than three, but...
Okay.
Yeah.
And so the defense was just kind of a concession to the needs of that time. And at this point, we can maybe say, okay, if we're talking about fusionism in today's context, we're looking at, you know, kind of the moral and liberal kind of fusion, I guess. Would I agree with that? I mean, yeah, I think you get just various combinations of this type of thing. But I mean, I think you start seeing most people are starting to take a question about like property rights. I mean, we call this populism, but populism comes in many forms. And I think, you know, conservatives who try to kind of resort to the fusionist definition, just saying, well, this is what our movement is about, kind of really insisting on freedoms and property ownership and things like that. They tend to get overruled by people who say, well, look, certain generations, certain types of people have all the property, and so I guess this matters to them, but they don't see themselves as like partakers in this tradition. They just feel like on the short end of the stick. So I mean, you know, in the abstract, sure, a fusionism exists today, but you know, on a practical level, I'm not sure. I think it's still very much a dwindling minority, right?
So let's get practical about home ownership then. Do you think that the solution to the very real fears and anxieties that I share, being of that age, about home ownership, does the solution lie in abandoning classical liberal principles around growth and abundance, or does it lie in leaning further into them against some of the legacies of the 20th century? For example, we never stopped subsidizing housing after World War II to try and open homeownership up to the boomers and the greatest generation, and yet that proved to be a barrier down the line to later generations, especially when zoning laws came into effect to protect their gains.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I think we need more nuance. Okay, I think a more nuanced understanding of property rights, and I'm not gonna. I'll side with the libertarians and the classical liberals every time. Yeah, we need to respect property rights, and so we want to prevent like monopolies or just too much regulation, or maybe the introduction of a whole new population of people that we don't, and driving up demand. So I mean, on one side it's an economic question, how to just have supply meet demand at a certain rate that works for Americans. But then on the political side of things, sure, I think we can say that no, we're not going to overrule the principle of property rights and personal freedoms, and just have like some kind of like socialist type of redistribution of property, and I don't know, like whatever they're trying to do in New York City. So yeah, I would concede that on a political level, sure, we can maintain like a fusionist principles, but on an economic level, we may need to get more nuanced and kind of include other factors into our deliberation.
All right, Auguste, it is your turn to ask the questions and James's turn to be in the hot seat.
I mean, I think I'll go back to kind of what we were talking about earlier. So how would you define fusionism today? And
I think the transcendent definition of fusionism that, like I said, Frank Meyer kind of came up with the term in the 20th century, but I think it describes something that was at the core of the founding and has always undergirded the Republican Party, which is it's a political alliance, which is natural, I think, between classical liberals and cultural conservatives. And then, yes, the third leg of the stool was relevant during the Cold War. I wasn't trying to get overly semantic about that, but I can understand that, yes, a lot of people would take it to mean that is also an important piece of it. I think that's a natural outgrowth of, by the way, of the idea of limited government. Means not the government does nothing, but that it does what it is supposed to, and its primary responsibility is to secure our rights. Not its only, but its primary, and that implies police to prevent neighbors from infringing on each other's rights, and most especially military and diplomatic duties to ensure that we as a nation, because we are a nation, more than an idea, we're both, require those things to ensure the protection of its citizens. So in answer to your question, I mean, I think that today what this takes the form of is there are solutions to a lot of our problems that can be found by continuing to marry these two philosophies. Going back to homeownership, I was shocked to learn that the homeownership rate for millennials and Gen Z is actually the same at this age as it was for boomers if you control by family formation. So the number one factor, it's not the only factor, but the number one factor preventing younger generations from breaking into the housing market is lower marriage rates. So getting people more interested in family formation, I think, is the number one issue we have to solve. It's more of a cultural issue, but I think that a lot of that can be addressed at the level of public education, which is deeply, apologies to your profession, it's been largely very pernicious in my lifetime, a space that is dominated by people who have successfully radicalized, as we've seen, young women are going way far to the left, and young men now in response are going more to the right. Oh dear.
Hang on a second.
We lost US pause so he doesn't lose his time.
Yes, I should pause it.
I feel kind of bad. I'm speaking a little long there. No, he's gone.
Let's see. It says his recording has stopped. There he is again.
Okay.
Auguste, can you hear us?
Don't worry.
Literally the second I stopped your so.
Okay. Well, no, I think that's a good
after.
explanation, and I mean, because again, I think the common understanding of fusionism is that it was kind of a pragmatic approach to building up a coalition in the 80s. I mean, Frank Meyer and Buckley and these types, I mean, I think they were trying to create like, okay, what are complementary components that we can build around to create a Republican Party that wins in response to the needs of that time. But what you seem to be arguing is that like fusionism is implicit in the Declaration and in the American Constitution, and that it
is.
involves.
I also could make an argument for the coalitional politics of today, which is that I think that some people have this vision that by genociding some of the free market shibboleths, as they're sometimes derisively called, there's some sort of alliance to be formed with the center left and leaning into more interventionist economics. That's certainly what J.D. Vance seems to want to do. And I just don't think that's mathematically true. I have here the political tribes graphic from Echelon Insight that they track every year. And if you look at all these groups, the smallest one at 6% are the new Republican populists, who are the people that seem to think that they can form a new coalition. And then if you look to the right of them, we have the moderate right, who are people who tend to be a little bit more socially liberal, but definitely fiscally conservative. And then people like me, who are both, who are 18%. And so the thought here is that this 6%, which is really small, is either going to grow to subsume these other two, which I doubt, because their defining feature is their economic views, at least that distinguish them from those who are economically left and socially right. And the idea that they can ally with the center left, I think, is foolish, because these people already hate them over abortion and gender, and I don't see that changing anytime soon, especially when you consider like the young and disillusioned group, which are the young women that will never vote for J.D. Vance because they think he's a creep, and they actually think that white men are terrible and need to be like all exported to Europe or something.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to kind of reconcile what the political situation seems to be today and maybe where we've come from. And I mean, to me, I just divided into two groups. You got the old guard that I think maybe kind of rely on the traditional three-legged stool of fusionism. And I think you have J.D. Vance, the populist wing, and I mean, and a bunch of others, the new right, they can call themselves, and they'll define themselves by other terms. And the real challenge now is to find like a common ground. So fusionism helped. I'm not sure it can continue playing that role of, coalition building, I guess.
All right, back to James asking the questions.
Okay. Well, on that note, let's continue, because I don't know if you've read Henry Olson's essay, Fusionism for the 21st Century, where basically he makes the argument that this alliance can be maintained if it adapts to issues differently. Yeah, technically you might have like a generational divide and people labeling themselves differently, but his thesis seems to be that you can basically use the same term if you apply it to like what I was saying earlier, I guess, about home ownership, and what do you have to give to the free market? Sorry, the pro-life community, while not going so far as to alienate the new, increasingly secular voters from this younger generation of populists. What do you make of that?
So you're updating the fusionist definition to kind of meet, I guess, concerns of today, or what?
Yes.
Okay, and you'll have to explain to me. So Olson, how does he kind of see a 21st century fusionism?
He looks at changes to the tax code. So, like, there are a lot of pro-family tax policy, for example, that satisfied both the classically liberal element and the socially conservative element that wanted, pro-family aspects of the tax code. That's been around for a long time, leaning more into that with refundable tax credits, for example, which is not something I'm actually in favor of, but I would be curious what your thoughts are.
Well, okay, so I've kind of understood that as what, common good conservatism.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, are we saying that the new fusionism maybe bears a resemblance to what people are calling common good conservatism, where it's like, okay, I mean, not altogether libertarian, but maybe, okay, yes, freedoms are prioritized, but we're going to look for a common good that maybe government can help with. I mean, and we're not talking about socialism and more handouts and all that. We're talking about, okay, preserving these principles of freedom, which, is at least half of fusionism, and then maybe kind of like incorporating a more moral approach to governing. I don't know. I mean, is
Yeah,
that fair to say?
I think so, but I don't know if we could call it common good conservatism because that, as we've seen in the last week, it's a very contested term. Let me put it
Right.
to you this way instead. What about if we look at, let's take it away from the federal government, looking at the state level, you can have an argument that the DeSantis model in Florida, for example, is, there's no income tax in Florida, there's not going to be one. It's a very free market state. He's a budget hawk. But on top of that, okay, the state's going to run public education. And they have a very strong school choice program, by the way, which is a Milton Friedman idea. Okay, all that's great. But to the extent the state does control education, we need to use that as a tool to properly inculcate the values of citizenship, which would be using the power of the state for conservative ends in a realm that the state will never be fully divorced from. What do you think? What do you make of that?
Well, I think it sounds good in theory, but I guess I start kind of wondering: do we have? I mean, do we have any like real working models of what you're imagining with New Fusionism, or New Fusionism, I guess we'll call it. I mean, because I can think of like Sweden or maybe some other Western European countries that maybe satisfy this, or do they kind of go the other direction?
I think Florida is the closest I can get. I think that history hath shewn that every attempt to do this in Europe results in the secular progressive atheists taking over and then inculcating atheism, which has happened a lot in American public education. But that's not to say that if we embrace subsidiarity, another aspect of Catholic social teaching that comports well with federalism, we could score some real victories regionally, and that can be the definition of the new fusionism.
Yeah, I like Florida. I mean, I'm in Texas. We try to imitate Florida and do a little better, but it's not perfect. But, okay, now I guess my other question would be freedom. And this is kind of maybe a broader issue that I might have with libertarianism, is that, on a certain level, freedom is great. Okay, you want to maximize freedom. Let people do what they want to do, what they're good at. But obviously, morality enables maybe a deeper, better freedom, right? Competence allows more freedom. But I don't know. I feel like how do we restrain personal freedom, in such a way that promotes families flourishing, human flourishing? I guess when we say it's a matter of freedom and morality, okay, just on a very gross kind of crude way of saying the new fusionism, they're going to be kind of jostling each other for priority, or do you think they're compatible?
Well, I do think they're compatible. I think that tension has always been there, and it just needs to be managed, and that's kind of the essence of fusionism. There's a lot. I think there's a lot less tension than people imagine, but it's very real. I would be curious. I guess it's your question time now, but I would be curious as to exactly where you would curtail freedom and by how much to achieve these ends. If you were asking me that question, I mean, I know it's kind of self-serving, but the answer I would give is you look at Louisiana and their porn law. So they didn't outlaw pornography outright, but they did age restrict it and require you to upload a photo of you with a driver's license or photo ID so that in order to access porn sites. And this had the effect of driving them all out, right? And they've all region locked Louisiana. I haven't checked in on this recently. This is what had happened a couple years ago. I don't know if it's gone horribly wrong, but assuming that still worked, I think it's a great model because you're not outlawing something and you're not going to the deep state and the federal bureaucracy to micromanage morality. You're looking locally at government that's democratic and responsive to the people, solving local issues and trial ballooning things that, on a smaller scale that can be gradually socialized and adopted more broadly.
Yeah, I mean, tension is a nice way of putting it. I mean, it's almost euphemistic. So, I mean, it's just the case, just the example you give about, outlawing or regulating pornography or preventing minors, they raise a fuss. I mean, and I know it's not all libertarians, but some libertarians no, this is a freedom. You're infringing on our freedom. And the same goes for to me, what are social ills. I mean, porn is awful, but you have weed, you have gambling now, and this seems to be just hard to kind of implement. I mean, it's okay. I mean, maybe it's a great clarifier. Okay, I'll grant it that. Like, okay, well, what are we trying to do? Well, we want to maximize kind of a good, moral, healthy society while doing so with freedom and making sure that the two complement each other versus clash with each other. The problem is that, okay, I mean, I think on the school front, yeah, I think I agree with Florida. Texas has a certain version of it, and of just school choice. Okay, so allowing freedom in that way, and this is a way that kind of complements what the families are trying to do, and makes it maybe easier to raise your family in a way that you see fit, and maybe give them a more moral upbringing. But then I mean, I guess. It depends on who's in charge and who the electorate is. So, I mean, if you have a moral population, sure, they'll be fine with regulations on porn, bans on alcohol or drugs, or whatever, regulations on those two. But if you have what we're going to have, which is an adult, childless population of people in America, and I've written about this, man, I called it like 6 years ago. They just want to maximize just the pleasures, the hedonism, and I don't think they're going to have much interest in having any limits set for their, for the good of their soul or for the good of their, psychology even. So I don't know. I mean, I guess I get worried. It's like it's a beautiful idea, and yeah, we can say, oh, well, it's tension. I mean, these two things are always going to compete, but I need a little bit more reassurance. Is there something we can build into the leadership or the Constitution to kind of like make sure like one side doesn't just overflood the other one?
Well, I have a couple of thoughts about that. One is that I think that America historically did have a moral and religious population, and that it's been quite an aberration that we've been driven away from it, and this has been an intentional long march through our institutions, particularly the schools of education that form the curriculum the public schools have access to. So now we have to stand up competing institutions, which I'm very happy about, the Hamilton Center, the University of Florida, or the 7076 Project, to try and combat this, where the real wake-up of parents in conservative states to be like, you need to impose these values, you need to like make sure, like, these people are trying to prepare your children for you, right? So just saving those children from the propaganda is an important first step, I think, towards building a somewhat more moral society. But I mean, I would also say that we should have some degree of humility about what we actually can control for, and we should be very cautious. I think you are, but like, we cannot emulate Francoist Spain. And we can't emulate any of the countries that saw the real fusion or saw the church take over large portions of the state, because all that did was discredit the church. And Spain today is disgusting in a way that America's not, where we've maintained that your religious liberty, not separation of church and state, but religious liberty, which is, I think, a related concept that need not explain, but...
I mean, I would agree with that. I mean, and that is my fear, right? Is that... one side or the other, oddly enough, Spain, I guess, kind of went on the side of minimizing freedom and kind of imposing maybe a dictatorship, but I mean, I guess a traditional or right-wing kind of fascism. So I mean, and again, it's like we got to trust in the will of the people. I don't know. I mean, do you think that the Constitution that we're working off of, which has been great, can it continue? And I mean, most state constitutions kind of imitate kind of the same checks and balances. Is it going to be enough to kind of, curb the worst, the worst natures of people today? Or do you feel like, do you think fusionism can hold up against maybe the populist impulse on either the left or the right?
I suppose that's the question,
Yeah.
And I don't know how it's going to work out. But what I can say about the right of center coalition is I'm actually very, very skeptical that much as there's a sort of a populist moment we're living in, and it's popular among somewhat younger people, I don't know that it has legs for the long term, and I'll tell you why. Most of American politics, ideas matter. But what matters more than ideas is structure and demographics. And structurally and demographically, this is the future of America on this map here. So in many ways, this is I don't know if this is going to hold, but this is as of 2025 the
So California is red and Texas is green for those who
yeah, the
are
Green Party is
listening.
going to take over Texas. But no, this is the pink and red states are losing electoral votes and seats in
Okay.
Congress, and the green states are picking them up. What's happening is a net migration out of the blue states and out of the Rust Belt towards the Sun Belt. Or California's in the Sun Belt, but it's driving people to its neighbors because it's so awful and hideous to live there. Not just because the taxes are so high, not just because you pay extremely high taxes for shitty public services, if I'm allowed to say that, but also because they want to turn your kids gay when they go to school. And people don't like that. And so, I've got relatives that moved to Florida from California where they lived their whole lives because they were like, we wanted to raise our 4 kids without screens and didn't want them to, see porn in school and be told it was empowering in case they happen to be gender fluid, which they all are, obviously, because they're just indoctrinated to think that they're boys and girls.
Yeah,
But anyway,
contemporized.
all that aside, my point is that the power within the Republican coalition is migrating out of the Rust Belt and into the Sun Belt. And these Sun Belt states, these are fusionist states. This is where the fusionist coalition is alive and very well today. Because look at this is a very busy map, I know, but the green states on this map have a 0% income tax, and the yellow ones have a flat tax. The ones that are striped are in the process of changing to one or the other, right? So the states of the Sun Belt that are Republican run are either going to zero or going to flat taxes. They're trying to maintain business-friendly environments. They're very pro-energy, especially in Texas's case. Texas's grid management, which involves a lot of public investment, but the ERCOT system has been extremely, extremely successful in even making wind and solar energy profitable in the market. So they're very, very much economic liberty focused. Obviously not perfectly, but generally headed in that direction relative to these other states. Fewer unions, right to work, more school choice, more pro-family. The other thing these states have in common, they've restricted abortion, which means they have marginally higher birth rates, although that doesn't really guarantee you're going to go to replacement. It does save some babies. The partnership here, the pro-family culture, the ability to afford a single-family home, which Texas is generally pretty good for, at least compared to other places. You get to keep more of your money. All of this pro-family and pro-liberty, pro-market approach married to we are going to put the 10 Commandments in class. We're going to teach the Bible so people have the cultural literacy at the very least, and maybe they'll get interested in it. We're going to keep gender indoctrination out of schools in Florida, and we're going to protect life at least. I mean, not as much as I would want, but like 6 weeks is pretty good. That's a pretty, compared to where the rest of the country is going. So I would argue that these states that are both classically liberal and culturally conservative are the ones that are drawing people from the rest of the country. And they're not doing it through public subsidies. They're not doing it by infringing upon property rights. They're doing it by leaning into these things. And what this means over time is, starting in 2032, Republican candidate can win the White House without winning Pennsylvania or Wisconsin or Michigan. You just focus on winning the Sun Belt. And that is that means that I think the populist impulse, which is strongest in the Midwest, is going to be the junior partner in the coalition going forward. And what you call the old guard is going to actually have somewhat of a reinvigoration. Last thing I'll mention is this is the reapportionment, the redistricting results from mid-decade. All right, so you have to add 10 more congressional seats to this. But this is 10 seats just from the last 2 years of Republican gerrymandering, especially in the wake of the Calais decision. You got more people moving into the Sun Belt, and those states no longer have to give free congressional seats away to the Democrats just because they're black. So with that, I think you're going to see the House Republican Conference is going to become more Southern, more evangelical, less Midwestern, less populist, more from no income tax states, more from flat tax states, more hostile to taxation, more hostile to regulation. In a word, the revivification of fusionism at the federal level.
Well, gosh, I didn't know I was. I didn't know we were. This is a white pill. I appreciate it. So here's my concern. Okay, I don't think populism's going away. I don't think it's even concentrated all that much. I mean, yeah, I guess in the Midwest, where the concern is reshoring jobs and maybe having more government intervention, and maybe they're less concerned with preserving personal freedoms and property rights. But here's the thing. I think fusionism sounds good, if, you have a good job, you have a nice house, and things are affordable. And, I mean, and this is kind of the elephant in the room, immigration policy. Okay, and fusionism, to me, it's probably its biggest weakness or blind spot is how to handle immigration. And so I would say the Sun Belt, I mean, okay, maybe if you're looking at the Midwest populism, it's mainly concerned with just kind of a lot of these ghost towns and the rust of the Rust Belt, and the loss of manufacturing and jobs and just the decline of the white working class over there. But I think in the Sun Belt, you're having a lot of friction with just immigrant populations, maybe, kind of lowering the quality of life overall by boosting demand for property. So all the houses got a lot more expensive. All those good jobs that all our college grads thought they were going to get are not available anymore. And so if I were to approach somebody saying, hey man, don't worry, Texas is going to get some more representatives, and we're going to have more electoral power in coming presidential elections, they'll be like, well, that's great and all, but again, you're going to get kind of the usual concerns like, well, I don't know if I really care much about, I mean, I fear, okay, I don't want it to be the case, but I fear that it might be the case that fusionism begins to become a luxury belief, right? It's like, okay, well, everything's set up for you. I mean, and I don't know if people are going to see it as a means of addressing some of the challenges that have arisen just, from our own success, okay? So I guess and I know, and the left is always going to use this, like, okay, yes, California, New York, and a lot of these blue states are depopulating, but they still hold a big portion of people, and within their own, borders, they can still do a lot of damage. They can still kind of use kind of the current problems as fuel to create a populist, socialist kind of, government. So I guess my fear is that it's like, okay, demographic change, it's going to help red states, but I don't know if that's going to, I don't know if that's going to make fusion, I don't know if it's going to make conservatism as we understand it move back in a fusionist kind of framework and away from populism. So I guess, I think the way you would preserve fusionism, or at least to make it more relevant, at least in the near future with the demographic changes that you're bringing up, how would we treat the issue of immigration? I think that's, priority numero uno, for remaining relevant and kind of helping define who counts themselves as a conservative or a fusionist.
That's a great point. And I totally accept the, saying it's all right, Texas is going to get us more seats in the House is not an answer to somebody's immediate concerns. I wouldn't offer it as one. I would offer,
I'm Texan, so it's good.
Yeah, I mean, what I would offer though is like we have levers in the playbook that don't involve abandoning our classically liberal principles to address these concerns. Because I reject wholeheartedly the notion, and unfortunately the vice president said this recently, that there's been this bipartisan consensus of market fundamentalism for 40 years. I'm like, I don't know what America you've been living in for the last 40 years, but you literally can't even like buy and sell like broadcast television stations without permission from the FCC. There are a lot of markets that are still extremely overregulated that we could make a lot better. I think that there are a lot of these Midwestern states, you can also refer to the same map actually, had higher tax rates. And with the people leaving, they're responding. Ohio is a great example. Iowa is a great example. They're trying to eliminate their income taxes now too, which makes them much more attractive than their neighboring blue states for business, for investment, and for prosperity. So I think there are economic solutions that come from leaning into what supply-side economics has always offered that will help expand industry, because I don't think either of us think this is a zero-sum game. I mean, all regions can grow if they adopt the right policies. And getting public sector unions out of the way, getting tax rates appropriate, or eliminating the tax on work. These are all good ways, making it easier to build data centers, for example. I know it's they've become weirdly really unpopular, but they are factories of information that are great for local employment, for local infrastructure, for lowering electricity costs, and for lowering tax rates. But you mentioned immigration, so I think that my idea on immigration is the following: when it is controlled and orderly and the border is secure, the American people are in favor of immigration in the abstract. When it is chaotic, porous, and the borders are open, they are against immigration in the abstract. So I think we should opt for the former route. The political reality is that if you make sure immigration is safe, legal, and rare, everyone gets along just fine. The left will never partner on that because their idea is to open the borders to swamp the native population because they think they can outvote us. They're not necessarily even right about that because a lot of immigrants, like as they could, at least second and third generation Americans start voting more like Republicans. A lot of them have values that differ from the Democratic Party's luxury beliefs. But they're definitely right when it comes to illegal immigrants. Like whoever grants you citizenship when you were like living off the grid and in the shadows of, obviously you're going to reward them with your vote. So they think they're importing a voting bloc. So there's no way to get their buy-in on actual good immigration reform. And that's a problem because if you can't get 60 votes in the Senate, there's nothing we can really do to address the issue. But what I would say is absolutely shut down the illegal border crossings, aggressively deport. I mean, start with the criminals so you don't get yourself in trouble. I think ICE has made some missteps. I don't think anybody can dispute that, even though they are just doing their job. But at the same time, it's like if you prioritize breaking up every single gang in America first, you're going to have a lot more political capital to continue the project. But no, I mean, I totally would agree. Like, keep the illegal immigration, cut down on that. Absolutely. Here's something where I would turn against what perhaps is the business community line that we could agree on as a common ground statement, that we absolutely should have a national mandatory e-verify for all employers.
Auguste,
And if you don't comply with it, there should be some sort of penalty. And I'm not an expert on this, so I don't know exactly what those proposals have looked like in the past, but that is a clear, not even, the state should intervene to favor American citizens, but like employers should follow the law. That's a rule of law concern, as well as a nationalist concern.
Well, okay, so I mean, I
Hang on,
agree.
Auguste, would you agree with the common ground statement that there should be a national e-verify program for all employers?
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I do. I mean, I've read somewhere though, and I don't want to go down this tangent too far, but it's like it's kind of hard to implement because a lot of employers feel like, well, I'm doing the government's job. It's not my job to close the borders and da 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 da. I mean, I think it's just politically unpopular among donors, and so. But no, I would agree with that statement. But okay, I guess I just want to get back to the main thing about fusionism. See, I mean, James makes a good point. Yeah, we should, regulate who comes through on the border and, whatever serves our economic interest. But none of that, to me, seems really addressed in the fusionist idea, okay? I mean, really, at that, if you're just working off of, faith and morals and then, natural rights and freedoms, and you're looking at the problem of like, well, should we let this many people in, or should we just stop it, or should we deport? You're going to have people who consider themselves moral Christians to say different things. I myself, I'm a Catholic and I'm a practicing Catholic, and I've written about the issue of immigration, and I'm for deportation. I'm for a stronger border, and I feel like it's gotten out of hand. And I'm very critical of these Catholic charities that have really kind of enabled a lot of this stuff, and they're profiting from this stuff. And J.D. Vance has spoken to that as well. It's like, okay, so there's a conflict of interest. But all this is to say, it's just, if we're talking about the relevance of fusionism, and we're talking about the idea of updating fusionism, and to kind of keep it as kind of our foundation for good governance, especially in states that are currently growing and set to grow even more. I don't know. I mean, again, there just seems to be a big hole still there. I mean, it's like, again, I agree, some kind of sanity with immigration. I mean, but again, this means something different for everybody. I also want to ask, common statement, yes, e-verify, sure. But And you said that the whole plank of, Cold War defense, kind of really supporting a strong military presence in the world. What do we say about that now? Because this is a big sticking point now between people on the right. You have people that are neocons, they're for interventionism, and and I think they're working off of just what they understood in former decades, that America needs to kind of police the world and maintain free shipping routes, and this is good for the world, it's good for us, and keep the fight outside our borders, blah blah blah. And then, of course, you have the kind of isolationists or non-interventionists or even the realists, realpolitikish people, and they don't want to be involved. I mean, they want to kind of entrust a lot of these swaths of the world to whoever's there, whoever can kind of do it, and there doesn't seem to be much concern if it's this dictator or this theocracy taking care of things. Which is going back to the fusionism idea. It's like, okay, well, how are we to consider that third leg about foreign policy and defense? I mean, it doesn't absolutely go away. I mean, surely we can modernize it for today, right?
I actually think we can, because, and I think I'm glad you brought that up, actually, brought that back, because I think that it is self-evidently clear that during the Cold War, whether or not anybody said this, the approach ended up being liberal ends through realist means, liberal internationalist ends through realist means, when that aligned with American interests. So what I mean by that is that there was one overarching enemy that had to be defeated, which was godless communism. And I think everybody agreed on that. In order to do that, we did not attempt to turn all of Latin America into vibrant democracies. We partnered with whatever tin pot dictator we could find that was going to kill the communists for us. And that happened around the world. In some cases, it was a lot easier.
James, I have a question.
Yes.
Do you consider being pro-democracy part of fusionism?
I think a disposition in favor of it is, but it's not as an absolute. I think that fusionists were always willing to defend American allies when they were not democratic if the enemy was communism trying to subvert them. So Syngman Rhee was not democratically, well, he was democratically elected, but it was not a free country, South Korea, under him. Neither was South Vietnam. Neither was Taiwan under Chiang Kai-shek, right? Neither was Indonesia. Neither was most of Latin America in the years of lead in Brazil, or under the Pinochet, who did nothing wrong in Chile. But it's not
namesake.
You have to be actively anti-communist. Are you really?
Well, Augusto Pinochet.
Yeah. So, but yeah. Anyway, my point is that, so I think that, and then this was also true during World War II, right? Is like there was an enemy in Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, and we allied with the Soviet Union, who were just as evil, in order to deal with a more proximate threat. And then the next battle was against them. We also partnered with a lot of Islamists during the Cold War in order to defeat the Soviet Union, and Nixon open to China. And I don't think either of those were mistakes. I think they were necessary steps to defeat the enemy in front of us. And then the next battle then is against Islamism. So, and this actually ties into immigration too. I mean, this is where I'm willing, if we wanted to make a statement of principles, like I do think the West should be suspicious of Islam, and they have a tendency to subvert everything they move into, everywhere they move into. But so that's where I would add that to the immigration side of things. But while we're talking about foreign policy, I think having a pro-democracy disposition and a preference for working with democratic allies does not foreclose pursuing American interests. When the two conflict, American interests should win. But that also means we're going to have to partner with people who are less than perfect in order to...
Well, let me ask a slightly different question then. Do you think there are any non-democracies that are more free countries than any democracy? Or I should say, are there any non-democracies that are more free than some democracy?
Oh, yeah, I mean, yeah, Singapore is clearly, like, it's not a real democracy. It's fake, but you can open a business there in an hour, and it's a freer country than Canada in practice, where they have elections. You're not allowed to win if you're not the Liberals.
Well, yeah, so what it sounds like...
Could we make that a common ground statement about there being some non-democracies that are freer than some democracies?
Yeah, sure. I mean, and I think, Well, and that's kind of my question is that it sounds like fusionism, as it applies to foreign policy, it's not to spread democracy, but maybe spread freedom. Maybe freer countries are less likely to pose geopolitical threats. And, so I don't know, but again, what does that make of? Because again, you have a tension, as you would say, when you have a situation like Iran, where you want to liberate them, you want them to enjoy the fruits of freedom, and in so doing, maybe become a potential ally instead of an enemy. But the way you go about it is constrained by moral concerns, right? So it's like no one wants to send troops on the ground and just slaughter all the Iranians, even though, I guess we could. No one wants to drop nukes on Iran or anybody else. We just kind of do these air raids. It's gradual. We bring them to the table as much as we can. I mean, the same could be said about Israel and Gaza or any kind of Western country trying to contend with a hostile region or people. And so I guess for fusion, it was easy in the Cold War to figure out who the enemy was. They were commies. They were aligned with Soviet Union. Fine. Today, it seems to be more nuanced. And I feel like that tension is now becoming friction, right? I think people, especially on the right, will say it's immoral to attack Iran, to enforce our will, to make them open the Hormuz and not build a nuke and da-da-da-da-da, and not massacre their people when they get too rowdy, and not be Islamists. And they say, no, that's immoral, that's their culture. I mean, it's interesting because, we assume that morality entails like some kind of standardized, universal principles of freedoms and, and what's good and what's bad, like a universal kind of morality. But people who use the moral term, use the label of morality are relativists. They're like, oh, well, that works for the Muslim world, doesn't work for us. We just got to kind of make our peace with it. But fusionism would seem to kind of encourage us like, no. Okay, it can never be a good situation when you have an unfree, immoral kind of regime like you have in Iran. Therefore, we need to intervene. And so I don't know. But again, that's politically unpopular. And it's maybe something that's going by the wayside. It looks like we're going to become an isolationist kind of republic. Yeah. So, I mean, what do you say to that?
Oh, I think it's a huge mistake we're making in so doing.
Okay.
I will totally accept there are people who call themselves fusionists or who like associate themselves with this ideological project who are like out and out. We need to we turn the Middle East to glass and fix every country, right? I'm not there, but we need to be much more judicious with use of force. But I am like where's my level? It's Iran. Iran is been our enemy for decades. They say so, not us, right? They kill Americans. We didn't pick a fight with them. They've invented this whole revisionist history that FDR's son is like helped propagate in the late 20th century, that we overthrew their democratically elected prime minister. He was instigating a coup against the Shah and the military.
Mossadegh?
Yeah, Mossadegh he had purged the police and taken them over with his toadies, and the parliament had voted him out of office and he refused to leave. Like, it's the same thing with Allende in Chile. It's like the left has like rewritten the story as subverting democracy, and it's like somebody was elected and then became a dictator, and then we took them out and a new dictator came that was more aligned with us, or we had maybe played a part in that. Okay, anyway, the point being that I think that a more sophisticated worldview than perhaps your baseline neocon who wants to bomb everyone is the bigger issue is that Iran is a force for terror and instability in the Middle East. We can't let them have a nuclear bomb. Okay, that's number one. Number two, probably the best long-term solution for this is for the regime to fall. So if we can make that happen, we should apply the pressures that would lead to that, while also understanding that we can't ensure that it would happen, and it would be way too costly for us to invade, far more than Iraq, to try and micromanage that project. So my point would just be that if we can do things that make that more likely rather than less likely at relatively low cost, we should do them. I understand the public might be going in a different direction, but I also think that if you go hard in the beginning, and you took Karg Island 3 months ago when you had the chance and they were totally on their back feet, this a little short-term pain, it makes it much easier in the long term, even at risk of losing maybe a few more of our volunteer service members, who I don't want to send to their deaths, but they volunteered for this for a reason, and sometimes you do have to use them. And you do have to take those risks.
So, James, to be clear, you're saying you support the current war against Iran?
I support the idea of it. I don't think it's going very well because I don't think they went hard enough early enough. And if they had, we would be having a very different conversation because they'd be negotiating to get their refineries back rather than us trying to beg them to let traffic through the Strait of Hormuz.
So going hard early would mean bombing their refineries on Karg Island or something like that?
Or taking it. Like in the early stages of the war when they didn't have a leader, in that brief moment and didn't know what was happening.
Mm-hmm. So I don't mean to go too far down this issue. This is complicated, and I agree that I agreed with the idea of kind of seeing if we could do what we did in Venezuela and to do in Iran, and I agree that it would not be wise to just put boots on the ground. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure about, and I've heard people say, oh, we should have bombed Karg Island or taken over Karg Island and just go fast and heavy and hard. But I think there's always the risk that you kind of precipitate an unstable civil war insurgency thing that eventually happened in Iraq and Afghanistan and some of these other places. And so, I've actually been kind of impressed that Iran is still holding together despite our bombings and despite, apparently the losses they're apparently experiencing. And I think I would assume that the leadership, or, Trump's government Trump doesn't want to, obviously he wants to end the war, he wants to end the conflict, he wanted to get a clean decapitation, kill the Ayatollah, replace it with a better leader, and, have someone who's more cooperative, which worked in Venezuela, okay? I don't think we should take that away from him. But in Iran, it's like you gotta. Obviously, they were ready for it, and obviously they have many levels of leadership. And I think there's always a chance that. Well, and I've argued that there's a brain drain over there too. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure that they have the population. I think they used to have smart people, but they all left, and they're in America or in other places in the West. And so the population of Iran it very much resembles its neighbors now. It's not the cool place that. Had disco and kind of modern Western ideas, a few decades ago. Anyway, I want to kind of bring this conversation inward, because if we're talking about foreign policy, we're kind of entering a new phase, and again, I'm not sure what Fusionism has to say about it, if anything, which is the surveillance state, the rise of AI, flock cameras, and just even urban unrest. So, and then kind of dealing with the aftermath of kind of taking in maybe a lot of migrants from chaotic third world countries. What do we say? I don't know where do we draw the line for something like that, you see? So again, if you want law and order, that might require the use of suspending people's privacy rights or maybe their right to a jury trial. Like if we're talking about Singapore, they don't have jury trials because it's such a diverse place that a jury would just kind of vote along tribal lines and not even look at the merits of the case and just kind of undermine any kind of legal order. In America, we're getting to this point where, diverse kind of ethnic tribalism is undermining like the legitimacy of a jury trial. And even in blue states or whatever, it's, that determines like whether a person gets to go to jail or not. And again, the facts of the case don't matter. Body cams don't matter. I don't know. And again, we're talking about the relevance of fusionism. And when I see the challenges, the tension posed by, just urban chaos or disorder. Surely, we're going to have to curtail certain freedoms to maybe impose some kind of order. I don't know. I mean, so what is fusionism? If we're employing a fusionist mindset to that kind of problem, I feel like it's going to be inadequate. But maybe I'm missing something. How is fusionism going to respond to the surveillance state that we see kind of emerging?
Well, I don't know about surveillance. Before I get to surveillance state, just in general law and order, I mean, I think we can agree that Ronald Reagan was a representative of the fusionist coalition, right?
Sure, I guess.
He was a big law and order. He sent the National Guard in to shoot protesters in campuses when they were burning it down. He would not have tolerated any Hamas encampments in the University of California system. So no, I mean when there are violations of public order that threaten the body politic like that, and they threaten people's ability to live their daily lives. I think that's a clear violation of the rights of the casual citizen or the passerby by the violent protest group. Then yeah, absolutely, we send in the troops, crack down. That's what Nixon ran, and I think we have examples from recent history. Crime today is it was getting worse for a few years. It is nowhere near where it was in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. And we had the fusionist, conservative movement was at its heyday back then, and that was one of the great successes we don't talk about because everyone wants to talk about tax rates. I love that, but
I want to interject about crime for a minute. The population's also much older,
yeah,
which is part of the reason for the decline.
Part of the reason, but it doesn't explain what happened in Baltimore, where I live. In the last 2 years, the crime rate has declined precipitously, 10-20%. There's a pretty simple solution. They elected a new state's attorney who actually prosecutes people and doesn't allow cashless bail. There are pretty basic stuff you can do of insisting people show up for their trials, identify who the not by violating civil liberties, but obvious bad criminals are, because it's a highly Pareto efficient crime is. It's half of it's committed by a very small group of people, and most criminals commit one crime in their lives, and a very small group of them commit half the crime. And this is what Bill Clinton was talking about in the 90s, is lock them up. And that's where you see crime rates decline. I think that, James Q. Wilson's writings on broken windows theory, he's very much in the fusionist tradition. But if you we brought that to the streets in the 80s and 90s, we flirted with not doing that anymore in the 2010s, and now we're running back to it quickly. And I think that's how you deal with crime. I also think that juries have, in all the at least high profile, I think you're right that tribalism is infecting juries a little bit, and it's a growing problem. But in all the high profile cases I can think of, juries basically got it right. Kyle Rittenhouse got acquitted like he should have been. Derek Chauvin, may have actually been innocent, but there was good reason to convict him based on the information presented at the trial. They basically got that right. Nobody gets off for wantonly killing people like the guys who killed Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia or South Carolina, and but people aren't being wantonly prosecuted for self-defense either.
Wait a minute. You're saying you support the conviction of those guys in the Ahmaud Arbery case?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm not a juror, but it's. I think the jury got it right. I think the jury was right to acquit Kyle Rittenhouse.
I was a little bit slow on the draw before, so I'm going to give James another couple minutes.
Thanks.
Oh, okay. Well, just to that point, this is kind of an issue I've been exploring. Just freelancing as I write stuff. I wrote a thing about a trial, and it's caused a lot of controversy, and I think it kind of ties in with what we're talking about, which is the school shooter, Colt Gray. And so he shot up Appalachia School in Georgia. I think it's kind of outside Atlanta, one of the suburbs in Atlanta. And so I was surprised because, he got sentenced to life. He got the worst sentencing that the judge could give him, and the pushback was, oh, we can rehabilitate this kid, and this is not going to deter school shooters. Okay. I thought justice was done, and I was surprised by that. And that's what I wrote about, not kind of realizing that the bigger story and what people have kind of been arguing about is his dad. So this kid was 14. He was given a gun. And the kid obviously showed many signs of just being unstable, being volatile, all this other stuff, and he was just getting brainwashed, get his brain pickled by just the worst crap on the internet. And so, and the dad's like, you know, it'd be great and help my son feel better. I'm going to give him a gun. And I mean, I laugh. It's terrible, okay? And then he goes and shoots up a school and kills 4 people, wounds 9 others. So in these situations, and so people are complaining that, so the dad got sentenced to manslaughter, or no, to second-degree murder or something like that. He's going to face prison time, and he got talking to by the judge, and he's been made an example. And then you have a lot of people that are upset because it's like, look, you have a right to own a gun, and he has a right to raise his kid. It's not him killing people. He just did what he thought was best. And you know, what about the Second Amendment freedoms? And you know, and what about, you know, black parents over in the inner cities where their kids kill people? I mean, are you going to, you know, sentence them to crimes and stuff? And I mean, it's a good point. And I don't feel sorry for the dad. I think he was horribly, I mean, beyond negligent, and yeah, he should suffer for that. But I agree that this is a double standard that, you know, we know this is not going to be applied to protected classes. And so long as you have protected classes, not just in the case of, you know, legal adjudication, but any kind of situation, I wonder if fusionism is going to be kind of an impossible sell. You know, it's like, oh, you know, we just have freedoms, but we have kind of moral, kind of a law and order kind of stuff too, and they're in tension, but they work out most of the time. And I don't know. I think there's a lot of skepticism on that point when you have instances like that, where it just seems like there's a double standard that exists in our system.
Auguste, this relates to something you said before. Do you think there's a principled and categorical distinction between adult freedom and child freedom?
Yes. I do. I don't know. I mean, yeah, of course. I think minors are in the custody of their parents, and I mean, I'm a school teacher. I teach high school, so yeah. I think those guys, you know, yes, they enjoy certain freedoms, but within the context of a caretaking institution like the home or the school or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So presumably you could have a very strong pro-Second Amendment position for adults and also want stricter limits on children. That would include, you know, limiting the right of an adult to give a child a gun, presumably.
I mean, I feel that way. Some people think that's not. I mean, and again, if you're talking about Kyle Rittenhouse, I think he was technically a minor too, but it was self-defense, and I guess it was fine. So I don't know if it's situational or conditioned on that, you know.
James, I can't manually edit this number, but do you want to take another couple minutes?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm not convinced that because systems are imperfect, they ought to be jettisoned, and I don't think that we should adopt sort of left-wing ideas about the, you know, horrendous, you know, racism, you know, systemic racism against whites, I guess, of our justice system, because there are individual cases that, and I know I was citing individual cases, but the point was that, like, in all, like, kind of the high-profile stuff that get media attention that you worry could be sensationalized, like O.J. Simpson, where an obvious criminal gets off, it hasn't really happened in recent years because I think prosecutors have gotten better at figuring out how to argue those cases effectively, and so have, you know, defense attorneys, and you know, you have a pretty fair disposition of justice. I think our jury system is the envy of the world, and that's like one of the most sacrosanct things we absolutely should be off limits to even consider jettisoning. And so, I mean, I guess the question is, like, what do you say to somebody who gets really upset about, you know, a guy in Georgia? And I'm like, I mean, it's not a satisfying answer, but sometimes the answer is you're overreacting. You know, sometimes that is the answer. That's the answer a lot of the time to the left when they think that, you know, the word female is a slur, like, which young women apparently believe these days, which I learned the hard way a couple of years ago. But you know, at some point, you know, the facts don't care about your feelings, as Ben Shapiro famously said. You know, it has to be the answer, because I can't pander on the truth or the facts of a matter or the morality of a matter.
These sound like two different issues, though. Saying people are, you know, overly sensitive and get into fights with people who disagree with him. That's kind of different than saying we should tolerate a few clear injustices because the system overall is good.
Well,
I'm not even saying I disagree. I think just conceptually those are
no. So yeah,
points.
thank you. I mean, I think so the point I'm attempting to make is that the idea that because there is unequal treatment sometimes in our justice system because of protected classes, I don't think that's a reason to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think that we shouldn't have protected classes largely in law. Now, I'm not in favor of genociding much like sort of the landmark Civil Rights Act, especially the Civil Rights Act of 1964, even though I have pretty steep criticisms of it and its effect. At the end of the day, I think it's a mistake to pretend that it wasn't necessary to correct a pretty severe injustice that none of us should be comfortable with in modern society. And I don't think it created more problems than it solved, but I'm also don't wish to ignore that there were some pretty bad trade-offs that came with it too. I don't think affirmative action is contemplated by the Constitution. I think a meritocratic, colorblind society where all are equal before the law. I know some people think it's weak and gay to say that, as well as caring about institutions and decorum and precedents, but they do matter, and that especially is something that is impossible to achieve but worth striving towards. And I have yet to encounter a viable alternative to it that doesn't result in tribal warfare.
Yeah, I mean,
All right. Go ahead.
Sorry. Oh, yeah. Well, I was just going to say, I think the response to that is that, basically you're saying don't make perfect the enemy of the good. And, and on a general level, it's good. I think the argument against it, and sometimes I agree with these people, that it requires a certain homogeneity in the population, like a certain common values, common experience, a certain cohesiveness in your society for these systems to work as designed. And that when you have protected classes, when you have the infusion of immigrant populations, and kind of unchecked freedoms that are being abused, blah, 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 these types of things start to break down, and they're not really satisfying the needs of the people. I mean, I agree with you. It has been a good system. I worry that, just like you had in Singapore, where it's like jury trials become impossible because of just ethnic prejudice or whatever. I worry that America will get into a similar situation that, when our demographics continue to shift. We're an older population at this point, so yay. We're not out at night just robbing stores and killing each other as much as before. But there seems to be just a lack of unity in enforcing and inculcating, these values of classical liberalism, and fusionism, if you want to call it that. So, I remain hopeful. I agree with you.
Do you want to make this a quick 2-minute closing statement?
Sure. So,
I wanted to say
Sure.
one quick thing about that, which is that I largely agree with that statement, but I don't think that we can really lay the decline of homogeneity at the feet of immigrants or like immigration as much as we should at the feet of a concerted plot by the radical left to demoralize our society and take away what we held in common through their infiltration of chiefly Hollywood and the education system. And I would also cite what Yuval Levin wrote, which I thought was really, really insightful, that the boomers had the luxury of growing up in the most homogenous America with more social solidarity than we've ever had, because we're usually a pretty contested and chaotic place, like historically speaking, except for after World War II. They had the luxury of growing up in it, and they got to have the fun breaking it all down, and then they don't have to live with the consequences of that. I would blame them, and I would blame the radical left's attack on what Americans did hold in common, before I would blame our inability. Because I think immigrants are assimilating. I think they're assimilating into what the radical left wants them to assimilate into, which is hatred of this country. But if we had a different, if our elite institutions insisted upon assimilation into America as a good place, I don't think we would really have any problems, or they would be significantly muted.
Let's actually have James go first, and then Auguste can have the last word, because James had the first word.
Okay.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, I think fusionism, we've had a wonderful conversation today. I've actually I've learned quite a bit, I think. But fusionism remains relevant because there still is, though these things undergo different permutations, there remains a transcendent idea of classical liberalism, which is the idea of ordered liberty based around individual rights that our governments are instituted to protect, not to grant. That is undergirded by a sense of, frankly, Christian morality, whether one wants to appreciate that or not, that remains relevant into the future and will always be a part of America's DNA. The problems we face today are immense because of the growth of radical leftism, because of the rise of Islamism around the world and its attempts to infiltrate American institutions, and increasingly what we see is the Red-Green Alliance that wants to completely demoralize and subvert the American way. The best way to resist this, I think, is not to create blunt instruments, that we know are already exercised against us, but to destroy the instruments themselves. That doesn't mean that there's no role for the state to inculcate moral virtue, especially through public education and especially at the state level. But I don't think we need to completely rethink from the ground up our appreciation of our institutions or the value of trial by jury, the relevance of keeping taxes low and business easy to do, or the old goals of minimizing the number of abortions that happen in America, and public decency, and just getting rid of those scantily clad women in advertisements, in order to restore the level of morality our republic needs in order to survive into the future. And this project can be achieved. We have some structural advantages and demographic advantages going our way, and we can even still welcome immigrants as long as they're not all from Afghanistan, and succeed.
All right.
Should I start?
Auguste, you're up.
Okay. I applaud James for taking on this position of defending fusionism. I think he had a lot more work on his hands than I did, and I think he did an admirable job of just explaining why fusionism is the way to go, and for kind of helping us define fusionism in a more modern sense that kind of meets the demands of today. Freedom is still important. Christian morality is still important. These are still very much part of the American project, and these do need to be incorporated into our governance, local, state, national. So I applaud all that, and I agree with that. I think freedom, maximizing freedom within a moral framework is the way to go. But easier said than done, and so I would say that my concerns, and I don't feel like I was disproven on these points, but there are many blind spots in fusionism. Fusionism was made for a different time, and it was a convenient kind of word to use to kind of describe the coalition that formed during the Cold War. And I think to try to refit it into today's world doesn't seem to work. So there are blind spots, which are immigration, which are foreign policy, and which I believe still is a fair law and order system, a legal system. And fusionism, depending on who you ask, has different things to say on these issues that, to me, are becoming the defining issues of people's politics today. And so, while I would say fusionism has some good points and it served its purpose at the time, I think we need to move away from fusionism as we're defining it, and maybe incorporate some of its virtues into a new system that kind of addresses today's needs and maybe accommodates certain concerns of what we consider populism today.
All right. Thank you both very much. That was a great discussion.
I enjoyed it quite a bit.
Yeah, that was fun. I don't
sorry
normally
that-
do debates, so.
Neither do I. I apologize, Simon, for the spirit of comedy in which we both brought to this.
That is
We've
totally
been
fine.
far more combative.
I'm going to end the
Seems-
recording. Please stay on until it has stopped uploading.